ITN Evaluation Committee meeting. If I could have the Evaluation Committee members state their names for the record.
Corinne Elliott.
Sherry Schmidt.
City Commissioner Andy Amoroso, District 3.
William Waters.
Juan Ruiz.
All right, so tonight's meeting is to do two things. We will be providing a report about the meetings that William Waters and I had the past week with Hudson Holdings and Anderson Carr. Anderson Carr represents Oceanside Bar and Grill. We'll also be discussing the next step for the evaluation committee tonight. Excuse me. The process for tonight's meeting is solely for this evaluation committee to consider its next step. There is going to be no public comment tonight. If the evaluation committee makes a recommendation to the city commission has decided that it will hold a public workshop with public comment prior to making a decision. I have provided everybody, including the public, with a memo that outlines the process that we've been following and our timeline of events for the ITN. Just as a brief overview, we started this process as a staff initiative to deal with folks who were coming before us, city staff that is, with ideas about the beach, the pool, and the casino building. City staff decided, let's make this somewhat of a more formal process so we can accept in all these proposals in a written format, review them, and try to develop a recommendation for the city commission on which one to move forward with. We issued the ITN back in September of last year. We had the initial replies come in October of last year. We received replies from Hudson Holdings, Anderson Carr, who submitted on behalf of the Oceanside Bar and Grill, and Wave House Miami. This evaluation committee had a public meeting where they decided to move forward with all three replies and engage in negotiations. This evaluation committee held several private meetings of its own to discuss the negotiation strategy for each reply. There was one public meeting held with the three initial offerors, the respondents. During this process, this evaluation committee requested additional information from the respondents with the information due January 30th. Only two of the respondents replied, Anderson Carr and Hudson Holdings. This evaluation committee decided to move forward with further negotiations with those two respondents. In March, this evaluation committee requested final replies. The final replies were received on March 2nd. 30 days later, all of the information, all of the meetings became public information that y'all have access to. On April 3rd, the evaluation committee held another negotiation strategy meeting, and William Waters and I were directed to meet privately with Hudson Holdings and Anderson Carr to do further fact-finding on their proposals. On April 23rd, William Waters and I met with them, each responded separately. At this time, if the evaluation committee wants, we'll go ahead and go through the list of questions that we sent to them and what William and I learned. Okay? And William, if at any time you want to jump in and...
Well, I think after we go over those questions, I'll provide for the public a little overview of what our comprehensive plan and zoning code allows for or stipulates as being allowed possibly at the beach. There seems to be quite a bit of confusion over that, and most of this comes from the comprehensive plan that was adopted, amendments in 2009, and then consequently the creation of the Beach and Casino Zoning District, and then we did make some more changes to it, added a couple of caveats to those things in 2012 when they changed to the comp plan, and again, adoption of the LDRs, land development regulations, in 2013. So I'll go to those after we go through all this, because it does have some impact on what we will be doing next, if anything.
Okay, so on April 3rd, we sent a list of questions to Anderson Carr on behalf of the Oceanside Bar and Grill. The initial question was raising their initial offer to a combined base rent and CAM of $28 a square foot, and revising some of the requirements in their reply to comply with other lease provisions of the existing tenants. In response to that question, we had a good conversation about them raising their initial offer. They talked about perhaps two types of agreement, one to lease the vacant space and one to manage the ballroom, and to possibly split those up with different rents, management, and associated fees to get it to where the city would be comfortable with the vacant tenant space.
And that's Anderson and Carr.
This is Anderson and Carr. This is on behalf of the Oceanside Bar and Grill. The second question was to remove from their offer a exclusive valet service, exclusive assigned parking spaces for their employees, additional lights on the west side, and signage on A1A. William and I talked with them about the issues we face in each of those requests. We are looking at a valet service for all the tenants up there. We expressed that to them, and they are encouraged to hear that. We told them that assigned spaces are across the street at Old Bridge Park, which they didn't know about, and we talked about the issues with turtle nesting season and why additional lights may be prohibited, but we might have some flexibility there. We also talked about that signage was set at the beginning of this whole redevelopment of the beach and the casino building, and so it was limited to what it is right now unless we change the sign code.
Well, it's not changing the sign code. There's an approved site plan approval for the beach redevelopment as well, inclusive of the reconstruction of the beach casino itself. And so that was approved by the Planning and Zoning Board not long after I got to the city in early 2011. And if there are going to be additional signage allotments or locations of signage or things of that nature, that approved site plan would have to be amended by going before the Planning and Zoning Board at a public hearing to discuss what those changes might be.
Okay. The next question we had was reducing or modifying their request for an exclusive right to sell hot dogs throughout the beach with numerous hot dog stands. We had concerns with the exclusive right to sell hot dogs, and they said it would be only exclusive right to have 2 hot dog stands that are of a very unique nature with excellent hot dogs. So I think our understanding of what they were initially proposing and what they are actually proposing was a little different. 2 stands. Anyone can sell hot dogs at the beach, but they want the exclusive on the hot dog stands. Allowing public access to the second floor unless necessary for a special event. They were open to that. They said that they would consider keeping it just as it is now, where when the city has an event upstairs, it ropes it off for the private event, but otherwise anyone can go up to the second floor during the day when it's not being used. For the next question, number 5, sort of the same response, their willingness to allow the city to use the ballroom on an as-needed basis unless otherwise booked. They were open to that. You know, obviously that would be something for further negotiations in terms of specific dates for the city to use the ballroom, and then a way to contact them if we had an as-needed basis and it wasn't booked.
We also discussed having a fixed number possibly of reservations each month. Let's say it's 2 or 3 or 4 that would already be on there, and then if it's not booked, then the city could use it with notice in advance for other types of activities we have out there.
Before we go forward, did we ask if the ballroom piece was not included? Would that be a deal breaker? I mean, are they open to just looking at the vacant space?
I gathered from the way the various options that were discussed among us concerning the lease arrangement for the vacant space and a management arrangement for the ballroom, that it's highly likely that not having the ballroom would not be an ultimate deal breaker. They would want access to the ballroom, I believe, for special events that they would be catering.
Right.
But that would be very much like any other private provider who would be servicing on the ballroom as it is now.
Number 6, considering, we asked them to consider a date certain for rents to commence, regardless of the status of the build-out of that vacant space. They said it would be exactly 1 year from the date of contract approval, lease approval. They would have that build-out time. Rent would start 1 year later, whether or not they were ready to start serving customers. A provision of an itemized budget for the proposed build-out. We talked about the fact that they were going to self-finance the build-out at an estimated cost of $1.8 million. Most of that was in the vacant tenant space. Some of it went to update the ballroom and surrounding areas. But they didn't have an itemized budget at that time to provide. One of the things that we talked about was that the actual principals of the Oceanside Bar and Grill were kind of wavering on whether they wanted to continue with this because some of our initial responses and our questions about limited parking, no exclusive valet, those types of issues got them concerned, but they're still having a discussion of keeping this proposal going forward. The financing for their project will be self-financing by the principals of the bar and grill.
Chrissy, can we go back to the rents? I think that was like question 1, the financial component. If I remember correctly, their initial LOI was based on $20
$20
gross.
including CAM.
Right. Was there any financials discussed beyond them just saying, yes, we would be open to negotiating that term?
I don't believe we talked about specifics. It was more of structuring a deal so that the city wasn't carrying the vacant space or subsidizing a private entity.
Right.
But at the same time, I think maybe also getting a better grasp on how the ballroom and that vacant space would work together.
Right.
And that's when we got into the discussion about maybe split arrangements on the different spaces. But we didn't get into specifics about, well, we take 25 or we didn't get.
What specificity we get to is say that $20 all inclusive of both CAM and the rent, and the taxes was unacceptable.
It doesn't
We
work.
couldn't make it work at that, so it's gonna have to be something more competitive that would include the paying the taxes, carrying the actual rental cost, and an appropriate rental rate, understanding that the rental rate for a restaurant space may be different than the rental rate for a ballroom space.
Right. I guess so. I guess my question again is, how do we close that gap between, how do we get to the answer? Can they meet us where we need to be financially for rents and CAM and, and where their initial proposal, that's still a big area, from where we need to be based on our existing business plan and where they're at. I mean, we're talking 8 to 10 gross more dollars per square. And we're talking gross, we're talking close to $28 to $30 a square. When you're thinking a $10 CAM with another escalator, you're talking a minimum of $18 a square on the rents. And then we're not talking about patio, which is another $15 a square additional. And so when you start adding all that up, $20 gross it's not close to where we need to be.
Well, I think that's when we first started conversation, that was the problem, just for clarity for the audience. Taking something so low financially doesn't work. The idea is to get something that actually, pays the bills, breaks even, so the citizens aren't financially continuing to pay it like they are now. And we kind of came up with the numbers that we need, at least $18 plus $10 CAM to start. And we had talked about, there's going to need to be an escalator, cost of living, and they weren't coming close. So, we asked to go back, but still, it's still very unclear. I still have a problem with the hot dogs, the stand, but, that's just my personal preference. But I have a problem, if you follow any of the beach discussions, I have a problem with giving an exclusive to anyone, on anything, we need to give our options.
Oh, yeah, you're not alone with hot dog carts. There's a reason why we don't have hot dog cart stands there now.
Yeah, special event, I have no problem with food trucks, carts, but, on a daily basis, I'm not comfortable with that.
So upon your conclusion, what was your overall feeling, both you and,
Well, they were gonna,
William.
Anderson Car representatives were gonna go back and talk to the principals of Oceanside Bar and Grill on some of the issues we discussed. So unfortunately, we're kind of limited in how far we could go with our fact-finding with this group because the principals weren't there. And I don't even know if at that meeting they would have been prepared to say, we'll give you X for rent. It appeared that it would be an ongoing negotiation that would have to be fleshed out with some type of written agreement type of thing to sort of get to the bottom of what both parties needed.
and did they talk about the term of the lease?
No, we didn't.
That wasn't one of our questions at the time.
No. I think we asked for, the only thing we really asked for was the timeline for build out.
Yeah, we were concerned with, that we actually put a date and a timeline on that. But also going back to Juan's question about whether the space or the ballroom, because again, $18 per square foot is good to start with the actual vacant space, but the ballroom, depending on, the contracts that we already have, the parties, the weddings, that to me brings a larger value when we're looking at negotiating for both.
I think that's why they proposed, in discussions that we could look at a separate lease to operate a restaurant in vacant space. And then there were various options for running the ballroom space. It could be run as a management service contract. It could be a lease arrangement associated with the restaurant, but the rates would be different. I think there was a third one put on the table, another permutation of those two arrangements. And because we didn't really have all the numbers in place, it was left that they were essentially open to all three of those avenues to generate or create some sort of leasing, loosely termed leasing contract for both spaces.
Okay, are there any
So what
further-
do you suggest to do at this point with them?
Well, I think it goes into the overall purpose of tonight's meeting is, do we want to continue further fact-finding with this respondent? Obviously, the same question to Hudson Holdings. Or at this point, does this evaluation committee want to turn it over to the city commission and say, here's what we recommend, and I think one thing we've discussed in the past is with a recommendation, if it's for pursuing one of these respondents, is addressing some issues that we think further negotiations need to occur with. In some respects, we're at the same place with Hudson Holdings as we are with them. There's still issues that need to be fleshed out and discussed. I mean, more so with Hudson Holdings, there's a lot more issues because it's a bigger project and fleshing out those would take more time. Anderson Car, it's more of lease negotiations and some type of maybe management agreement.
Well, and I just wanted to say, for the public, we've learned a lot moving through this process. We've learned a lot of things that can be done, things can't be done, things that have been done in the past that shouldn't have been done, looking at things. So as we move forward, everything is public. I'm free to talk to anyone that wants to talk to me about some of the findings and some of the directions and things that we've learned just by moving forward. It's definitely an eye-opening process for the city and for the commission. And as we move forward with whatever the recommendation is, the next step is to move everything into a public forum, which we've already established from the dais, to have public meetings and then possibly look at an option or not looking at an option. It definitely has opened the doors and opened our eyes to pros and cons about doing anything additional at the beach. We have identified that there are issues at the beach, there are problems that we need to try to fix, whether this is one of the solutions or not, or its future ideas. The process has really been eye-opening for all of us.
All right, do you guys want to go over the fact-finding with Hudson Holdings? Okay. William and I met with Representative Hudson Holdings. Stephen Michael, Elaine Burns, and their architect Don Durante by phone were present in the meeting. Hudson Holdings provided a revised design that I emailed out to the evaluation committee members last week, and Debbie Andrea, the city's public records manager, has a copy. So everybody should have a copy. So to go through the questions that we sent them and their responses, and what they just handed out was a written responses to the questions. The first question the evaluation committee asked was willingness to pay for a traffic impact analysis study for the beach property. Hudson Holdings said yes, they would certainly do that, and William asked that they provide the scope ahead of time, so that he and his staff could review it to make sure that the appropriate scope was provided to whomever was doing the traffic study. Hudson Holdings said yes, they would take care of that. Second question, willingness to provide 2 pools, with one dedicated as replacement for existing pool, junior Olympic style, open to the general public without restrictions. Hudson Holdings' new design shows 2 pools, one a junior Olympic pool to replace the existing pool, and it would be run according to Hudson Holdings just as the current pool is run. Open to the public, same hours, with lifeguards provided. And we've had some further discussions on that, on making it a better design to have direct access to that pool from the back drive that's proposed. I think that was about it.
Was there any conversation about that pool, the expense to the city, as far as, right now, we have about a $200,000 expense. Would there be additional expense at any, or would it just be an overall cost?
Right, my understanding, and William, jump in if my understanding is incorrect, was that they really want to take over this whole area, and they will manage and operate both pools, and the expense would be borne by them.
Okay.
But obviously, that all goes into a discussion regarding how much rent they pay to the city and those types of things. But the initial discussion wasn't that the city would be continuing to fund for this pool directly.
And why isn't it more like 300,000 a year that we, overage the budget per year that we pay for the,
What total operating expense?
over the,
For the pool,
for the pool, it's 100,000?
where are we at?
No, it's close to 300,000, yeah.
Per year?
Yeah, it's
That's a
98,
loss.
just keep watering it closed.
Yeah, but it's
Right.
over 200,000,
Yeah.
but, okay.
As a loss.
And that's, that's a 29 hours a week, you know.
I think that we're getting some numbers mixed up. The overall cost around the beach is one number, but we do have some revenue coming in. That revenue has been growing a little bit, so the actual loss has been coming down somewhat since last year.
Right, well, I mean, like, last year's revenue came in at about slightly under 70,000. This year we're projecting maybe close to 80. Our cost recovery is still below 20%. You kind of want to be close to that 45 to 55% cost recovery. And that's at a loss. It's still at a loss. But however, with that being said, I'd really like to dig into the new proposal. Obviously I got questions regarding those. But I guess before we do that, finish giving up the wrap up from
Okay.
Paulson, please.
The estimated, this is question number 3, estimated completion date from date of award. They estimated at this time it would take about 20 months to include both the design, permitting, and construction of the project. And the one thing they said is with the revised design that they submitted, obviously there's things missing that haven't been addressed. So what they've submitted as a revised design is going to continue to evolve.
One thing we did ask them about as well is that the phasing of the project, and they were open to constructing the public Lake Worth Junior Public Pool and having it completed before the other pool was demolished or taken out of service. So it would be a phased implementation, but 20 months on the outside to have it all done.
But just to clarify, William, do you recall what are they calling a junior Olympic size pool? Are we talking about a 50-meter pool that's 50 by
It doesn't
25
have
yards?
dimensions on it, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, that would be important because everyone's definition of size is different, so,
Yes.
you know, we need to, if they're, I mean, they're stating, in this, at least in this document, that they're willing to replace the existing community pool with another pool. What does that mean, apple for apple, or, you know, does that include a dive well, or, I guess we need clarification on that if we get to that point.
Right. Question number 4 was the lease rate to city for vacant tenant space, ballroom, patio, beach rental, courtyard rental, et cetera. The same thing to charge the current tenants. They represented that they were looking at and considering $20 a square foot gross at this point. But that just is a preliminary sort of discussion point. Obviously, there's a lot more involved in determining how would we lease this space. I mean, would there be a lease for the junior Olympic pool?
Was it gross or was it under, it said under air conditioning?
Under air conditioning?
Yeah, it says,
Okay, that's in the written one?
Yeah.
Yeah, we just talked about in gross, and we didn't get into any specifics about,
I took away from it, that was $20 gross for the 5,400 square feet only. We didn't really get into what the rental rate would be for the patio space outside of it. That's where I understood that we were at with that.
alright.
okay, question number 5. The requirement to replace current parking spaces that would be lost with proposed parking garage support development. If you recall, in the previous design, they had a parking structure that would have taken current parking spaces, and because of the city's grant requirements, we have to maintain so many parking spaces there. So in the revised design, there's a little table at the top that talks about the parking structure, and I believe the net parking spaces is 108, with 4 additional spaces added near the back entrance that's proposed.
And that includes 100, that's included in the 108.
Is that included in the 108?
Yeah.
Okay. And this would be a 2-level parking garage. Question number 6, we asked them to consider reducing the scope of the proposed development based on the FAR limitations, and the proposed that they submitted this design has, I believe, 25,000 roughly square feet. So it's a smaller project than what was previously proposed.
I'll just jump in that we'll have to sort of define what leasable area is per the zoning code. The total buildable building area is right at 35,000, and how they've calculated leasable space, they have about 26,500. And we'll have to decide how we define leasable area at the beach. My conclusion was that all of it, in essence, is leasable space, but the 35,000 square feet, from what records we have, would fit below the 65,000 square foot limit of leasable